Sometimes a game is played that is so interesting and so brilliant that it becomes exactly what you see above me, an instant classic. Levon Aronian met up with Magnus Carlsen at the 2017 Altibox Norway Chess Super Tournament, and this is what happened. After an interesting Slav, or even mainline semi-Slav, the first original move was played here on move 10 when White played the move bishop to c2, a novelty that overcame its predecessor, the move 10 rook to e1. But nothing necessarily groundbreaking or super aggressive in this novelty. After Magnus Carlsen placed the move rook to d8, we're expecting the normal roads to be traveled, which is that when you have tension built up in the Slav, at some point somebody's going to blink and break first, and that's exactly why Magnus's rook is likely very useful on d8. However, Aronian had different ideas in mind, and he shows us that with this first really interesting move, a3, sacrificing the pawn and inviting Magnus to go ahead and take it. Magnus does so, and probably expected maybe a positional idea for Levon to follow. Something like c5 is interesting. It cuts off the communication between the queen and the bishop, and White maybe has some compensation to play for. As you see above me, the computer can't even really make up its mind. But no, Aronian had something even more aggressive in mind, and I'm going to show it to you right now. He played the move rook takes a3. Exclam, and really the point. He draws the queen into a3 and puts her in a position where she may regret where she stands. To really show you exactly how surprising the move rook takes a3 and how it made the world champion feel, I'm gonna let you take a look at how Magnus reacted to the move when it was played over the board. At first thinking, and then we're gonna see, well, I didn't really see that coming, and kind of gives us the face of a little bit of a surprising idea. So Magnus's face says it all right there. But he did take back the rook, and after c5, started to go into some deep thoughts, giving it a deep think because he realizes that the queen is not necessarily trapped yet, but may have wandered farther than she feels comfortable with. Whenever you have a pawn chain like this, though, the positional ideas are normally to undermine it by either attacking it with the lead pawn or attacking the base pawn, this pawn here on d4, which is kind of the core pawn holding everything together. It guards c5, it guards e5, and so that's why the two critical moves we're going to have to show are both the move b6 that was played in the game and the move e5. One of the key ideas to see exactly why this exchange sack works after e5 is in the variation here. After trading on e5, the key is that White has this nice intermezzo. The knight comes to b1, which removes the queen from attacking c5 and therefore prevents her from getting out. After the natural exchange of things, you see all kinds of moves coming in, and the only reason I'm showing this variation is because we're going to see this idea repeated as the way Aronian planned to justify the exchange sacrifice. That's with moves like bishop b4, where suddenly the queen has lots to think about. There's threats of the knight coming back to c3, and very, very good chances that Black is not going to be comfortable getting the queen out of there. So that's why e5 wasn't played, or at least a very quick summarized version of why e5 wasn't played. Magnus played b6, which was deemed best by most of the analyzers afterwards and both players. But after the move b4, we see really the practical idea. And I say practical because Aronian could have gotten the queen back. We see this knight to b1 idea again that I already showed you, followed by, again, bishop to b4. And let me show you exactly how that finishes off. Once the knight comes to c3 and the queen goes to b2, the key is that when knight a4 is played, after the queen moves, we have bishop to b1. Nowhere else for the queen to go. If she goes to a1, we're going to have a discovered check where the bishop gobbles up h7, and we see the queen on d1 doing what she needs to do to the black counterpart on a1. But, of course, Magnus wouldn't do that. And what we realize in looking at this variation is that the world champion probably fully intended to sacrifice his queen and actually play a position where he has a rook, a minor, a pawn, and it's not that simple to see exactly why White is going to win this game. Probably White is better, and the computer certainly feels better after getting material back, but the evaluation is all over the place, and it's not exactly clear what White's plan should be to win. So instead of going for that kind of variation, Aronian makes Black's life even more difficult with the move b4, which, again, just strengthens his positional hold over the dark squares, reminds Black that his compensation is based on more than just the queen, but actually his lack of development and his potentially bad bishop. As long as this pawn structure stays this way, this bishop is not a very good piece. b4 is really just one of the key brilliant ideas that puts Black in an awkward position all around the board. Of course, taking the pawn is not really possible for Black's queen, as we'll see discoveries here Never put your queen on a file there or a diagonal with the bishop. The knight would take on d5, and black would have serious problems. So he didn't take on b4. He played knight e4. Logical moves continue, and after bishop takes e4, it suddenly becomes clear that really white is already feeling good about this sacrifice. Not only am I only down the exchange, so I have a miner for the rook, I have threats on c6. This queen has still not gotten herself back into the game, and really black is under fire. He played the move rook to b8, he being the world champion Magnus Carlsen, and that's the next interesting moment. He does this because it's a practical point that this c6 pawn maybe doesn't want to be captured anymore. If black can just develop and start trading, he has up the exchange. But you don't have to ask Aronian twice or ask me once, don't fool me twice. When you give me a chance for the Greek gift sacrifice, I'm going to go for it. And he plays bishop takes h7. That's where you know the gloves have really come off. Even if a3 was preparation, even if rook takes a3 was preparation, which these days I don't think these guys should have anything taken away for brilliant preparation. To out-prepare somebody in the top 10 in and of itself is already pretty brilliant. But regardless of that, there's no way this position was on the board in preparation. And so for him to calculate and have the gumption to go for this sacrifice, entering a game where he is now down an entire rook without a forced mate on the board, and this is not a normal Greek gift where the mate is just coming. Black played knight f6. That's exactly what Magnus did, which was proper to defend. But we're going to see the point. After queen takes f7, white continues to flex the muscles of better coordinated pieces and taking advantage of not just this lady's detour over here, but also the awkward position of the rooks, the fact that the bishop still hasn't developed, and all the threats that come with that. He plays the move queen to c7, a double attack on the rooks that you don't see every day, and it clears up this f7 square, which is exactly where this knight is headed, and suddenly we start to see the evaluation shifting all over the place, and even the engine's like, wait a second, I may be up a rook here as black, but I like white. And that's what happens. Knight f7 check came in. He gobbled up the rook on d8. One of the big brilliant points of the knight coming to f6 rather than f8 to guard h7 in the previous line is that here, at the end of it, Magnus has knight to d5. The world champion not going down quietly, showing that this queen is not in the best position anymore either, at least in terms of trying to hold on to her defense of this knight. So that's why after the queen had to move, black gobbles it. But unfortunately for Magnus, the queen still hasn't moved ever since her initial entry into this faraway point away from where she needs to be. And so she just doesn't get back in time. e4 comes in, making the knight move, which is going to let my queen come back to c7 if I'm white in just a second, and that's going to provide the double attack I need to, again, put black in a position where he's reminded if he goes into equal material, his king is open and he's down way too many pawns for that to be the case. He has to play the move queen to g5 to try to defend that rook and keep the pieces on the board. But after we capture on c6 as Aronian, d6 was also interesting just to keep the passed pawn and keep that bishop bad. But Aronian had the most accurate approach taken, which was taking the main point is that the white squared bishop has to go to c8. Why? Because if it went to e8, the queen slides to b7, and there's no way to stop c7 and c8 queen. A very, very key point that prevents black from still reaching full coordination. He had to play bishop c8. And after the move h3, a very, very subtle move that just frees the back rank and reminds black that he's a few moves away from getting all the pieces where they want to be. Queen to d5 is played, rook to d1, e5, and now the final execution where all of white's pieces continue to be better coordinated, rook to d3. The rook is sliding over to g3, g7 is going to be a problem. The rook on d8 and the bishop on c8 are still not developed well. Magnus took on d4, and after queen to e7, blundered with bishop f5 that made it easier. But even if he had played rook to g8, after queen h4 check, bringing the king up in c7, this is just, I don't want to say impossible, but looks pretty darn impossible to hold. Even the computer gives white +2 despite being down a piece. Make note of that. Computer says white is up +2 despite being down a piece, and the concrete variations there should be pretty straightforward. He played bishop f5, which makes sense. When you haven't been able to develop that bishop all game, when you've been struggling to reach optimal coordination, you finally get a position where it feels like everybody is working together if you're Magnus Carlsen. But after the move rook to g3, you realize defending g7 is a very, very tall task. And after bishop g6, he just resigns on the move queen h4. Why? Because after the forced move king to g8, white is going to capture on g6. and the game is going to be over Red Rover about +5. So with that, we bring this to a close, and the main thing we are reminded of is that sacrificing pieces works well as long as we have a chance to keep our opponent unbalanced, struggling for coordination, and we can keep the initiative going. Aronian did just that against the world champion and took him down on his home turf in Norway, making this game an instant classic.